Hey everyone, welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. I'm Ari Witten, your host, and today I am with someone who I'm a very big fan of, Robbins, who is doing just phenomenal work in the field of reforming public policy with regards to health and nutrition, and he's really a thought leader in that, and he's the CEO and co-founder of the Food Revolution Network, and he's the co-host of the Food Revolution Summit. So welcome, Robbins. Such a pleasure to finally connect with you.
Well, likewise, Ari. I'm thrilled.
So, I'd love to get started by having you talk about your family background, because this is just a fascinating story. I knew of you for a long time as like I always thought you were the son or maybe the grandson of the founder of Baskin Robbins. And it's such a strange twist on events that you went from, the family went from ice cream owners to now what you're doing now, which we're going to talk about. But I would love if you could just tell people about that whole story, and maybe people who are not American or not familiar with all of that.
Absolutely. It is an interesting story. So my grandfather founded an ice cream company called Baskin Robbins, 31 flavors. And my dad, John, grew up groomed to one day join in running the family enterprise. He grew up with an ice cream cone shaped swimming pool in the backyard and 31 flavors of ice cream in the freezer. But as he came of age, he was offered the chance to join in running the family company, and he said no. And he walked away from a path that was practically paved with gold and ice cream to, as we jokingly say in our family, follow his own rocky road. And he did so because his own uncle, Bert Baskin, my grandfather's brother-in-law and business partner, was at the time dying of heart disease. He passed at the age of 54.
Wow.
I never knew my dad's uncle Bert because he was gone before I was born, but I do know that he was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in American history. He had a family he loved, and he had financial success and abundance, but he didn't have his health. And so he ended up leaving his wife a widow and his kids, my dad's cousins, fatherless. And my dad took a look at his uncle Bert and said, I don't want to spend my life selling a product that's going to contribute to more people dying of heart disease. Now, an ice cream cone is not going to kill anybody, but my dad was well aware that his uncle had eaten plenty of the family product. And although we didn't know as much then as we know now about the relationship between food and health, the truth was starting to emerge even then, that ice cream was no health food. And so my dad walked away, moved with my mom to a little island off the coast of Canada where they built a one-room log cabin and grew most of their own food and lived very simply. They practiced yoga and meditation for several hours a day, and they named their kid Ocean. That would be me. And years later, my dad ended up writing books exposing the shenanigans of the junk food industry and the horrors of our factory farming industries, and inspiring people to look at their food choices as a chance to make a difference in the world. And what we got very clearly was that people were responsive to his story. The media called him the rebel without a cone. And one of the people who responded, as fate would have it, was my grandfather. See, my grandpa, Irvin Robbins, had always eaten the standard American diet plus a double scoop of ice cream on top. And he wound up with serious heart issues, weight issues, diabetes, all the things you'd expect from somebody. If you eat the standard American diet, you're going to get the standard American diseases.
Yeah.
So that's what happened to my grandpa. But then, as fate would have it, his doctor gave him a copy of my dad's book, Diet for a New America, which was a 1 million copy bestseller.
I just love that. That's so phenomenal.
So my grandpa read it, and he followed its advice, and he cut way down on his meat consumption, and he gave up sugar, and he gave up ice cream, and he started eating a lot more whole plant foods, and he got results, big results. And he lost 30 pounds, and he got off all his diabetes and blood pressure medications, and his golf game improved 7 strokes. And he was one happy camper. He lived another 19 more healthy years. And near the end, when he was in his 90s on his deathbed, I was with him and with my dad, and he said, thank God some of us have lived long enough to learn a few new things. And he said, thank God you followed your own star. I thought you were crazy, but you were right.
Yeah.
So, I think if my grandpa could change, he was one stubborn cookie. He was used to getting his way with everything. And if he could make a change, given the level of investment he had in the standard American diet, and thinking there's no connection between food and health, and thinking that ice cream is just fine, then I think there's hope for the rest of us too.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. And very well said. And I just think it's so cool that your dad made that decision to not sort of take over the family business when it was just, such a golden financial opportunity was being handed to him.
Yeah.
That's such a remarkable decision. And then you're there kind of continuing that path that he started carving out. It's just beautiful. I love it.
Yeah.
So Food Revolution, you're the CEO and co-founder of the Food Revolution Network. You run the Food Revolution Summit. What does this mean, food revolution, and why is there a need for a food revolution?
We hear the word revolution bandied about for everything from a brand of new razor blades to a violent uprising. But what it means to me is fundamental change. And that's what we need. I mean, the way I look at it, food 1.0 is about survival. If you can get enough calories to fill your belly, then that's success. And for a lot of people in the world, that's where it's at. There's a lot of people who are freaking heroes just to keep their food in their kids' bellies every day, But for those of us who have enough to eat, then often the next level is food 2.0, which is commerce. The central organizing principle in food 2.0 is buying and selling goods for the best possible price. It's a marketplace transaction. And it's brought us 31 flavors of ice cream. It's brought us an abundance of taste and texture and cuisine from all over the planet. And as expensive as food can be, we spend a lower percentage of our disposable income on it in the industrialized modern world than any people ever have in history. But unfortunately, food 2.0 is morally bankrupt because it's creating foods that are tasty and are addictive and are lethal. And so that's why I think it's time for food 3.0, which is where we make health the central organizing principle of our food system, health for our bodies and health for our planet. And there's plenty of profits to be made in food 3.0. It's just that they come from healthy profits that come from healthy food. So I want to see a food revolution because I am sick and tired of a food industry that acts like our health didn't matter. Mm-hmm. And I'm sick of a health industry that acts like food didn't matter. The average physician in all their years of medical school gets 19 hours of nutritional training. Less than a third of the medical schools in the United States have a single required course in nutrition.
Right.
So, I think a doctor not knowing about food is kind of like a firefighter not knowing about water.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's such a great way of putting it because, I mean, it really truly is insanity that doctors are being educated and the vast majority of the burden of healthcare is with chronic disease that are diseases of nutrition and lifestyle. And the doctors who are supposed to be treating those conditions are receiving virtually no education whatsoever in nutrition and lifestyle. And then we have a public who's kind of taught that these are the authorities on health. I need to go talk to my doctor about nutrition. Well, your doctor, more than likely, unless they've self-educated themselves, they know close to nothing about nutrition.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
I mean, it's just absolutely insanity.
Meanwhile, we've got McDonald's providing nutritional education free of charge to schools. And we've got McDonald's setting up cafeteria shops in hospitals.
Yeah.
So in that context, here's what it comes down to, Ari. I think that the good news is that as bad as things are, that's how much better they can be with the change. Mm-hmm. And so we have normalized something that is toxic.
Yeah.
And what that means is that we can do so much better. So as painful as it is to really face what we're up against and how many lives are being lost and how many lives are full of suffering right now, including a lot of the people who are with us right now, you know what I'm talking about, like that most of us fear for our well-being and our children's well-being. 2/3 of our population is overweight or obese. A third of our kids are expected to get diabetes in their lifetime. Heart disease is killing 14 million people on the planet this year. Cancer is killing 8 million people on the planet this year. Alzheimer's and dementia rates are skyrocketing. It's the third leading cause of death in the US right now, and that's going to double in the next generation. How many families are being ripped apart? How many lives are being destroyed? And how many people think that it's normal to feel like crap and to watch your memory deteriorate? Half of the people over the age of 85 have Alzheimer's. Yeah. And we can prevent most of that. I mean, the reality is that diabetes, heart disease, cancer, dementia, autoimmune disease, obesity, these are symptoms. If you drive your car into a brick wall and you die, the death certificate might say the cause of death was brick wall crashing. But and I know that was the symptom, and the cause of death was terrible driving. Yeah. So as a lifestyle, if we're going to eat this way, we're going to get the predictable outcomes that we see rampant all around us. But the good news is that we know better, and we have thousands of medical studies and the examples of the healthiest and longest lived peoples in the world to learn from and be inspired by. And they tell us clearly, 90% of cases of cancer are caused by diet, lifestyle, and environment, not genetics, not bad luck, not deficiency of some as yet uninvented drug, by what we're doing. Right? Which is good news, because it means we can do something different. And that's why we need a food revolution. And that's why I'm so passionate about sharing this with as many people as possible, because too many lives are on the line. Too many lives are being lost and ruined, and we can do something about it. Yeah, beautifully said. So there seems to be sort of two prongs to what you're doing. One is sort of with regards to this food revolution. One is kind of advancing public policy. And then the other one is kind of speaking directly to the general public and increasing awareness of how to take better care of yourself and how to eat properly. Yeah. So let's dig into the first one first and kind of talks about public policy. And granted, this will be biased towards America, I'm sure. But we can talk about public food policy in America and kind of how that's affecting what the general public is and ending up putting into their bodies every day. Sure. You know how to get my blood boiling. So here's the thing. In the US, we say we have a free market. We say that, consumer is king, and that, the marketplace responds to consumer demand. But in practice, we have tilted the playing field to subsidize junk food and unhealthy food. And we do that in a number of ways. The most obvious one is that we have a farm bill, which is a taxpayer-funded initiative that provides tens of billions of dollars a year in subsidies. Now, I like the idea of helping farmers out in rough times. Our farmers work hard. They deserve our backing. But most of that money is going to the richest farms that need it the least. And it's going to commodities growers, corn, soy, cotton, wheat, the so-called staple crops, but not to fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and legumes, which are actually the things that we know we should be eating more of. So by subsidizing these foods, we're also subsidizing their byproducts, high fructose corn syrup, factory farmed animal products. Most of the corn and soy grown in the world isn't fed to humans, it's fed to livestock. And so by subsidizing corn and soy, we are subsidizing the factory farming industry, which profits by a cheap source of nutrients, i.e. corn and soy, to feed to cattle and other livestock. And it makes it so that pasture-raised farmers can't compete on the marketplace because they're competing against a subsidized industry. When I was in negotiations with Coca-Cola about a GMO labeling, they informed me that they are GMO-free in Europe, where they use sugar to sweeten Coke instead of high fructose corn syrup in the United States. I said, why can't you be GMO-free in the United States? They said, oh, we couldn't afford to. I say, why? It's because high fructose corn syrup is subsidized in the US. It's not in Europe. So we couldn't compete with other soda companies because they're using it. And we can't use a non-subsidized product when there's a subsidized one available. So by subsidizing corn and soy, we are subsidizing cattle feed and Coca-Cola, right? Instead of supporting the stuff we should be eating more of. And this is ironic for those of us who can afford to make choices around food and choose between different options and go organic. Maybe this is annoying, but for a family that is on the edge, that is trying to survive, that can barely make rent, and that's most people actually today, this is sometimes a life or death situation. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by life or death is that if all you can afford is the cheapest calories available, then you are essentially condemned to nutritional disaster. Mm-hmm. Because taxpayers are creating an unlevel playing field. Now, what would happen if that same money went to fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and legumes and healthy foods? How would the marketplace shift overnight? Yeah. And how would the poor particularly be lifted up? Right now, it is people of low income who bear the greatest brunt for our nutritional crisis, because their diets tend to be the worst, because they are stuck with the worst calories, and one of the reasons is subsidies. Now, for another example, we have an organic certification program where those of us who want to can pay a premium price for food that was grown without poisons. It's a pretty good thing to be able to do that if you can afford it. But what about everyone else? What about the people who can't pay sometimes double for certified organic food? And why does it cost so much? Well, one of the big reasons it costs so much more is because the organic farmers actually have to pay for a certification process. And if you go to a farmer's market and you talk to the small growers, some of them aren't even certified, and they say, we can't afford those fees. If you want to grow a backyard garden, you can't call it organic unless you pay somebody to come out and certify you, right? Mm-hmm. So what would happen if we made the people who are using poisons pay inspectors to come out and say that they're doing it okay? And if we created a lower regulatory burden for the people who are doing the right thing, who are growing food more safely? What we have now is kind of like you're being fined for wearing your seatbelt.
Right.
And again, it creates an economic disincentive to do the right thing for our health and our bodies. And then we also look at the fact that, in a sense, the corporate food industry is completely unaccountable for the health impacts of its choices. So they are outsourcing the real cost onto the consumer through the health crisis we're going to face. So I'm curious what would happen if there was even some visibility, if we even had like coding on food products to show how healthy they are or aren't.
Yeah.
If there was some visibility so people knew what was up. Or if we want to go a step further, what about if, just like we've made tobacco companies pay, we've put taxes on cigarette packs and then use some of that money to fund saving people from the harm caused by those products, providing medical care for people who were dying of lung cancer, and then providing education so people could know what was up. What if we did the same thing with sodas? Sugary sodas. What if we did the same thing with factory farmed animal products? What if we did the same thing to Wonder Bread? I mean, with all due respect to these things, I'm a big fan of consumer choice. I think people should be able to eat what they want. But I also think that it shouldn't be subsidized by taxpayers, and we should have the information we need to make informed choices. McDonald's doesn't have a monopoly on Happy Meals. Actually, there's not a heck of a lot of happiness in not remembering the names of your loved ones because you have Alzheimer's. There's not a lot of happiness from wondering if your spouse is going to survive the year because they have cancer. But this is what we're creating when we eat these Happy Meals. So I'm interested in policies and practices that will hold companies accountable and provide consumers with accurate information and create at least a fair marketplace, if not a marketplace that supports us doing the right thing, because I think that will be of greatest benefit to the people who can least afford to get sick in the first place.
Right. Yeah, I think that, you encapsulated this idea of the fact that poor people are condemned to nutritional disaster and then end up, even though they can barely afford now to eat the right things, or they can't afford to eat the right things, so they end up eating a bad diet. Well, now they're eating a diet that is going to lead to chronic disease down the road, which is then a huge burden of expense. Yeah. So, I mean, it's almost like they're being forced to pay either way. It's just whether you're paying it up front or you're paying down the line, and then also how you pay determines your quality of life.
Yeah.
As far as if you can, or if you decide to pay it up front, then you can hopefully avoid or greatly delay chronic disease and extend your lifespan, and
That's right.
improve your quality of life. But I mean, yeah, it's very interesting to think about labeling foods in that way, because there's obviously a huge body of literature on, say, sugar-rich beverage consumption, sodas and things like that, or various processed foods, and links with specific chronic diseases. We know these links. There's hundreds and sometimes thousands of studies on these links. So what's to stop us from putting labels on these things that say, hey, this product is consumption of this type of food is linked with this disease and this disease and this disease? Put it right on the label and force those companies to put it on the label, and pay an extra tax, pay an extra bit of money when you want to purchase those products, if you want to decide to eat them, so that you are then funding your own healthcare as a result of consuming those foods regularly. That's
right. Exactly. And in Chile, they've just put in taxes of 18% on sugary beverages, and they're trying to seriously tackle the obesity epidemic. Now, I'm not a fan of taxes for their own right. I think that my interest, if we do something like this, is to use that money to help subsidize making healthy food more affordable. We also have experiments where food stamps are made double value for fruits and vegetables. That's been done in the United States, and there are actually about 500,000 people right now who are taking advantage of that. The government isn't funding that, but private parties are supplementing and working in tandem with the government to make that happen. And it can actually bring down obesity rates in a community. It can uplift the health of a whole population when we make these kinds of changes. So my interest is, how do we make it easier for people to do the right thing? Now, what happens is, if you subsidize, if you help make fruits and vegetables more affordable to more people, you don't just help them, you actually change the marketplace in the community. So there are fresher fruits and vegetables, and the stores have more incentive to stock them, and to put them up front, because they're selling more of them, which makes everybody have more of them. And when they're fresher, when they get their deliveries every day instead of every week, then you're not looking at wilted lettuce and moldy tomatoes. You're looking at stuff that's healthy and fresh and vibrant, and it changes the whole culture of a community. And this is one of the things that I think is powerful in the food revolution, is more and more people are changing what they're buying, and that's changing what companies are selling. So as much as we could gripe and complain about the food industry and how crappy its products are, we really do have to take some responsibility if we're buying this shit. You know what I mean? So it's, at the end of the day, what are we going to choose to support? And we have to recognize that we are everyday food revolutionaries with our own knives and forks, because we're shifting through the system of supply and demand. We're shifting what we're demanding, and then we're shifting what's going to be supplied. Yeah. So, I'm curious, in talking about kind of lowering the cost of healthier foods, is there research to show that really works? I remember seeing a documentary several years ago, and this was maybe 8 years ago or something like that, on an experiment in a small community in a very urban area where most people were shopping at like the local liquor store for their food. And so they were getting mostly just processed junk food. Right. And I remember I forget exactly the details of it, but they did some kind of thing to make healthier food more accessible and available in this community. And they found that people were still just going to buy the processed junk because they were addicted to it, essentially, or, it tastes better. And it's more pleasurable to eat. So is there something else that needs to be done besides making healthier food more available and cheaper? Is there something else is there anything we can do to help people get off of like the processed food addiction? Well, absolutely. I mean, we need so many different avenues here. I think it's like a biodiversity of options, right? So we need to shift the subsidy system so we're not subsidizing junk. We need to provide education and consumer empowerment so people know what the impact is. We need ethnically appropriate messaging, so people in different communities can reach out, so that it's not all white folks talking to communities of color as the experts, because as we've seen through history, sometimes that can be suspect. We also need to show positive examples. We need to focus on hope. Pain pushes, but vision pulls. So a lot of us are motivated by fear of disease, but a lot of people can also be motivated by knowing what's possible. More and more celebrities and sports stars are eating more wholesome, healthy foods. I think Tom Brady's been a good example of that, you know, because he's very outspoken in his passion for a plant-based, wholesome diet. And, you know, obviously he's got the results to back up that it seems to be working out okay for him.
Yeah.
You know, so now more and more of his teammates are jumping on board, and, you know, Gronkowski has joined him, who's his star tight end. And, you know, there's a lot of 11 members of the Tennessee Titans have gone vegan, actually, in the last year. So, you know, we don't think of football players this way, but there's a movement. There's kind of a groundswell of people shifting as the culture is shifting. And speaking of which, I mean, I tend to stay away from the vegan word because I'm interested in a big tent approach. But it is worth noting that since 2014, the number of Americans who identify as vegan has increased sixfold.
Wow.
6 times more people. In the UK, it's 3 times more people. In Germany, the number of people who are on a low meat diet has gone from 22% to 42% in the same 4 years. So we are at this moment in history seeing a pretty massive seismic shift of people who are moving away from a meat-centered diet and also away from sugary sodas. Sugary breakfast cereal consumption is tanking. Coke sales are going down fast. That's something else they were sharing with me that they're pretty scared about. And so, you know, that's because people are sick of being sick. But back to the strategies we can employ, I do want to say that Journal of American Medical Association in 2016 published a study. They looked at 10,000 Americans and what they reported eating. And then they calculated how much of their diets were made up of food that was subsidized by the government. And the authors of the study found that more than half of Americans' calories came from subsidized foods.
Wow.
And that diets full of subsidized food were high in dairy, simple carbs like sugar and white flour, and factory farmed meat. And what they found was that the more subsidized foods people ate, the lower their diets were likely to be in fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and overall quality. That poorer and less educated segments of the population were eating vastly higher quantities of these subsidized foods. And in effect, the old adage is beggars can't be choosers. What we were seeing was that a lot of the poorest people couldn't be choosers, and this is what they were eating. Compared to people who ate the least subsidized food, those who ate the most had a 37% higher risk of being obese. They had a 34% higher risk of having signs of elevated inflammation, and a 14% higher risk of having abnormal blood cholesterol levels. So it does matter. It's not the whole story, but I think it's safe to say that the subsidies are having an impact on what people are eating. So yes, of course, there's cultural factors and cultural change needed. And a lot of us, quite frankly, are addicted to junk food. And I think you know this well, and we both are fans of the work of Dr. Susan Pierce Thompson, who is helping us understand the neuroscience of food addiction and how it really works, and how a lot of us think we're in charge of our choices, but really the wiring of our brain is dictating what we think and feel. I will go a step further and say that the bacteria in our gut are playing a largely unseen role in this as well.
Yeah.
You know, most of the genetic diversity in your body is your bacteria, not you. Yeah. And the bacteria in our gut feed off of what we feed them. So if we feed them junk food, we are going to attract bacteria that like junk food. If you feel hunger in your stomach, ask yourself, is it you that's hungry, or is it the bacteria that live in there that are hungry? And they're like, ooh, give me more. So when we feed our bacteria healthier foods with lots of fiber, which is what the good guys like, then we are able, they are producing a lot of the neurotransmitters that tell our brain we're happy, that tell us we're full, that help us sleep well, that give us peace. They are digesting a lot of the food and doing the work that helps us to get the most out of our most nutrients. You know, it's not just that you are what you eat, it's you are what you digest.
Yeah, I'll also add, you know, just on an energy specific point, since this is the energy blueprint and a lot of the listeners are struggling with fatigue, that some of the things that are produced by bacteria when they feed on fiber, like butyric acid, actually impact directly on the brain and increase a neuropeptide called orexin, which is actually one of the primary things that regulate energy levels and give us a sense of energy and alertness. So there's actually a very, very direct link between what you're talking about here, as far as bacteria consuming this fiber, producing a chemical that then feeds back into the brain, causes your brain to produce a chemical that gives you energy. So, I mean, and that's just to name one of literally dozens of pathways and systems of the body that are affected by this.
That's right. So we want to get our brains wired for success. We want to get our bacteria thriving and fed for success. And then we create sustainable, healthy habits. You know, the key isn't what do you do at your best when you're in a peak state of happiness and ease. The key is what do you do when you're tired and stressed, and what's the path of least resistance then? Because that's where you're going to end up most of the time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in a toxic food culture, the convenience foods and the fast foods are also junk foods. Walk into any 7-Eleven, McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, and you see it's all crap, pretty much. So in that context, if you want to take care of yourself, you've got to think ahead, you've got to plan ahead, and you've got to build the patterns that set you up for success. And similarly, we've all been wired in our brains and in our digestive bacterial milieu for a lot of junky patterns. And so creating new pathways is a life work, actually. You know, every day I'm asking myself, where am I carrying patterns and habits, not just with food, but anywhere in life, that don't truly serve what I love and what I'm alive for. And when I become conscious of those, I want to treat it with love and compassion, not self-judgment. And then I want to wonder what else is possible.
Yeah.
You know, what would be a healthier pattern, and is there a way that I could help to bring that, institutionalize that? You know, the Grand Canyon was carved by water that went in the same place day after day, year after year for millennia. And similarly, deep patterns get grooved, but they can change. And we get to be the authors of that. So I think the right use of willpower is in creating healthy habits.
Absolutely.
And then the path of least resistance does the job from there.
Yeah. And this, I think that's a perfect segue into the other prong of what you do, which is increasing, you know, awareness among the general public as far as the right foods to eat. So let's dig into that a little bit. And I get the impression that you are, I don't just get the impression, but I know from seeing your videos and seeing your work that you're kind of a big picture guy, and you're not really interested in promoting any one specific diet, but you're interested in the big picture principles of what the overall body of evidence says we need to move towards as far as nutrition. So what does that look like? What are some of the key sort of principles of what it means to eat a healthy diet?
Okay, well, I think that the 4 top principles, I really have 4. One is eat less processed junk, sugar, white flour, things with more than 5 ingredients on the label, generally, chemicals you don't know how to pronounce. If you couldn't make it in your kitchen, if it takes a lab to make it, then it's probably not good for you, because we need to eat more plants and less food that comes from plants, as in factories. So that's number 1. Number 2 is eat less animal products. Now, I know that meat is controversial and there are a lot of different takes on it. And there is a high probability that if we ate more pasture-raised animal products, we would see different health outcomes than we see from the factory farm stuff. But the preponderance of data from thousands of medical studies to me indicates that red meat in particular is carcinogenic. It means it causes cancer. It's linked with heart disease. It's linked with diabetes, and it's linked with obesity. And similarly, in general, dairy products are linked with a lot of problems, from, you know, IGF-1 to hormone impacts that are not detrimental to human well-being. And, you know, I mean, they're perfect food for a baby cow, but we're the only species that consumes the milk of another species, or that consumes any milk after infancy. So as natural as it seems, we've heard it's nature's most perfect food. You know, I think it's not necessarily best for humans. It's an acquired taste. And so less animal products and more whole plant foods, fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, legumes. We have so many medical studies showing us that we can prevent so many cases of cancer by eating more whole plant foods. And, you know, for seasoning, spicing, using less sugar, salt, and fat for seasoning, and more spices. If you look around the world at different cuisines and cultures, often spices are a hallmark of cuisine, from, basil and, oregano in Italy to, chili peppers in Mexico to, the curries and the turmeric they use in India and all over the world. And in the United States, what are our like famous flavors? It's salt and sugar and fat in different forms, fried, KFC, or we fry our chicken and we dump our food full of sugar and so I think when we can season our food with spices, we will get their incredible health benefits, and we'll also be less inclined to consume the junk food that we know is artery clogging and cell killing and health damaging. And then the fourth principle, so again, it's eat less processed junk, eat less animal products, eat more whole plant foods. And then the fourth principle that I stand behind is conscious sourcing. I think that in this day and age, we have to recognize that food is personal and it's also political, that it does cast a vote for the world we want. And for example, right now, there are over 1 million kids in the Ivory Coast that are enslaved in the chocolate industry. 1 million children. And most of us don't realize that. So Hershey and Nestle and the other big chocolatiers are sourcing their chocolate from parties, that are sourcing their chocolate from parties, that are getting chocolate from destitute farmers who can't afford anything more, and they need their crop harvested so they don't ask too many questions, and they pull in a bunch of people, the lowest price labor they can get, and it's a slavery industry. It's heartbreaking, but it's true. And at this point, there's no organic chocolate being produced over there. So if you go organic or fair trade certified, you're going to be getting chocolate from other sources. But if you go with the mainstream chocolate, Ivory Coast produces and Ghana, they produce over half the world's chocolate. So if you're eating mainstream conventional chocolate and it's not fair trade and it's not organic, then it's tied to slavery, and that's what you're helping fund.
Wow.
I don't want to be a part of that. And I don't want to be a part of a chemical independent agricultural system where the average farm worker in the United States has a life expectancy of 49 years.
Wow.
And there are many reasons for that, but one of them is chemical exposure. Rates of cancer are epidemic in the farm worker community. So one of the reasons I want to go organic as much as possible is, yes, I don't want to expose my body to all those toxins and the neurotoxins that are in pesticides, but it's also because I don't want farm workers to have to be doing my dirty work and essentially dying on the job from pesticide poisoning. And I don't want to support animals being tortured in factory farms, where chickens have their beaks cut off so that when they go crazy and try to peck each other to death, they won't succeed because their beaks have been trimmed. Or, these animals are driven crazy. They never see a blade of grass or the sun in their entire lives. And of course, the products of that system can be toxic for humans, but they're also toxic for our hearts, I think. I don't think any of us want to see this, and we certainly don't want to fund it. And so to me, conscious sourcing matters. That's why fair trade and organic and humane and pasture raised aren't just nice marketing slogans. They actually mean something to me and to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I love that you're bringing awareness to that, because a lot of people perceive organic and fair trade as just, this just, rich people and elitists and foodies kind of, and hipster types choosing to do this thing because it's trendy and because they think it's healthy for them and so on. But really, conventional has just as good of health properties as organic. And, that's where the discussion ends. And that's as deep as they think. And what you're saying is there's all these other layers to it. There's ethical and moral layers. There's environmental layers to it. There's concerns over animal cruelty, concerns over human slavery. I mean, there's all these things tied to the everyday decisions of what we're putting into our bodies.
Absolutely. I don't think there's anything elitist about wanting the farmers who grew your food to have been paid enough that they can feed their own families. I don't think there's anything elitist about wanting animals that are being raised for human consumption to be free from cruelty and not to have to live lives of torture. I don't think there's anything elitist about saying, hey, I don't want kids to be enslaved so that I can eat cheap chocolate. So, of course, if you can't afford organic, don't let that stop you from eating vegetables. For example, I know someone recently who like said, "Oh, I can't afford the organic broccoli," so she went and bought an organic donut. And I was like, I think somebody's kind of missing the point here, There may have been more than economics at play in her decision, but I think that it's clear that all those medical studies we've heard about where people got great benefits from eating vegetables did so eating commercially grown vegetables for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you should be scared to eat, but it does matter, and there are ripples that go out from it. And for those of us who can afford to support a more humane and a more sustainable and a more safe food system, I think that it is a privilege to be able to invest in that.
Yeah. Now, what's your take on GMOs? Because this is an area that's still, I think, very controversial. And there are a lot of people in the mainstream community, the same people who would say that organic is just a bunch of elitist foodies and nonsense. And a lot of people who identify as skeptics and evidence-based people will say, "Oh, GMOs they're proven to be perfectly safe," and and really these are all a bunch. Anybody who doesn't like GMOs are just people who don't understand science and are just afraid of the science that they don't understand. And GMOs are great science-based, safe things that are going to help feed the world.
Right.
So what's your take on that debate?
So first of all, what's a GMO? Some people think it means God move over, but it means a genetically modified organism. And Monsanto and the biotech industry told us that GMOs would lead to better yields to feed a hungry world and more drought-resistant crops, that they would lead to better flavor and nutritional profiles, and that they would lead to reduced pesticide use. So those are the big 5 promises, and we hear variations on those trumpeted all the time. But 25 years into the mass cultivation of genetically modified crops, we haven't gotten any of those benefits. We do not have better yields, acre for acre. Union of Concerned Scientists did a report on this. They looked at actual yield from GMO crops versus non-GMO, and they concluded that it had not led to any net increase in food production on planet Earth. We haven't gotten more drought resistance at all. We haven't gotten any improvements in flavor or nutrition. And we have got a net increase of more than 580 million pounds of pesticides. So what are we getting from GMOs? We're getting 2 traits. 99% of what's in cultivation today provides one of or both of these traits. One is that they're pesticide producers. They produce Bt in every cell of the plant. This is a pesticide that's been used in organic agriculture for quite some time. It's generally considered non-toxic to humans. When bugs eat it, their stomachs split open and they die, certain bugs. And it's registered with the EPA as a pesticide. So we're eating a lot of Bt crops. We don't know what the impact of that is on humans. It may be fine. It may not be so fine. But the other major one is they are herbicide tolerant. So historically, if you sprayed crops with herbicides, you'd kill the weeds, but you'd also kill the crop. So now we've got this herbicide tolerance, which means the plants can withstand them, and not coincidentally, the same companies that made the herbicide-resistant crops also made the herbicides to which those crops are resistant, which is a great business move if you think about it.
Yeah.
But for the consumer, we are now eating massive quantities of glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. Now, glyphosate has been declared a probable carcinogen by the World Health Organization. It's been declared an endocrine disruptor. And many people don't know this, but it's been patented by Monsanto as an antibiotic. Mm-hmm. So it can disrupt something called the Shikimite pathway in bacterial process and kill bacteria in the process. But also the Shikimite pathway is a process by which bacteria turn our food in our guts into neurotransmitters. So there could be a link between glyphosate consumption, potentially, and leaky gut syndrome and the bacterial problems that a lot of people are facing in their guts, the digestive problems, and the rates of depression that we are seeing today. We don't know this for a fact, but we do know that since GMOs came into widespread cultivation, rates of food allergy hospitalizations for kids have quadrupled. So could be coincidence, there could be other factors. Correlation isn't causation, but when you see correlation this strong, it begs a question. What the heck is going on here?
Yeah.
And because we are all guinea pigs in an unmonitored GMO experiment, because they've been introduced rampantly into our food supply, most of our corn and soy and cotton, alfalfa, and sugar beets are genetically engineered today. We're all being exposed on a significant level, and a lot of the processed foods in particular come from GMO sources. So, are GMOs inherently evil? Are they inherently even dangerous? I'm not so sure. But when you look at what's being done with them in the hands of these industries, they're making a killing by using these seeds to sell their pesticides, which are being sprayed on our croplands. Mm-hmm. And now that we have super weeds coming up that are resistant to Roundup, they're spraying them with 2,4-D, which was one of the active ingredients in Agent Orange. It's linked to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It's not something you want to be eating. So when I look at these facts, I say, well, what can we do to avoid these things? And the number one thing you can do is to go non-GMO, particularly with your corn, soy, sugar, and cotton, which is used in cottonseed oil. Most of our animal products are fed GMO feed as well. But one thing a lot of people don't realize is that glyphosate is being used as a desiccant now on non-GMO crops to dry them out right before harvest. Monsanto has been pushing this in a big way. And researchers estimate that while a small percentage of the total glyphosate used is used as a desiccant compared to what's used as an herbicide on GM crops, about half of our dietary exposure now comes in that form.
Wow.
Because it's done right at the time of harvest. So we're talking about wheat in particular, but also oats. The US EPA just raised the amount of allowable levels of glyphosate on oats by 300 times.
Wow.
In order to accommodate use of glyphosate as a desiccant. Now, nothing about what was safe changed. They didn't have some new study saying, hey, this stuff's safe. In fact, to the contrary, we're seeing studies showing us it's not safe. Mm-hmm. But what did change is industry practice, which led to an EPA that unfortunately is interested in, Monsanto's interests more than our health.
Yeah.
So if you want to avoid glyphosate, you need to not just avoid GMOs, but that's a really good reason to go organic, especially with the staple crops, the grains and the legumes, because that's where it's being used.
Excellent. So I have one more question for you, which is, it seems you're more towards the, I would say, plant-based, vegan end of the spectrum. There's a lot of people swinging in the opposite direction now, where paleo meat-based diets, keto diets that are extremely high in fat, very, very low in carbs, and often very high in animal products, are becoming all the rage.
Yeah.
I'm just curious what your take on those is.
Well, I think that obviously these are all different things. I mean, with the paleo direction, I have to say there's a thoughtful vegan approach and a thoughtful paleo approach have more in common than most people realize. Mm-hmm. I mean, both approaches are against consumption of sugar and processed and refined carbs. Both approaches are actually against industrialized animal products. And both approaches favor a whole lot of whole foods and vegetables, right? And then where they differ is, on the one hand, paleo doesn't eat grains and legumes. And on the other hand, vegans don't eat animal products, right? But thoughtful paleo folks often recognize that our ancestors did actually eat some legumes. And they've certainly been a part of the human diet for a long time. And that there's medical research showing us that whole grains, I'm not talking about white flour, but whole grains in their natural state are associated with positive health outcomes in a whole lot of medical studies. Mm-hmm. And thoughtful vegans can recognize that, some wild salmon or wild fish or even wild game can be associated with positive health outcomes for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And that in the blue zones, where the people have traditionally lived the longest and healthiest lives, there's 5 of them that were identified by Dan Buettner from National Geographic. And, one of those is mostly vegetarian, Loma Linda, California. The other 4 are low meat, but they're not vegan. And in fact, there haven't been a lot of actually exclusive vegans in human history. So thoughtful vegans can recognize that it's an experiment, that it's an innovation, it may be an improvement, but it's definitely something new. And if we want to look at history, we can certainly recognize that purely from a health perspective, there's a case to be made for some thoughtful animal products in the diet. Now, ethically, some people may not want to do that. I totally respect that. That's another matter. But if we're talking health, now, ketogenic is kind of another story. I think that the ketogenic diet, which is kind of similar to Atkins in a lot of ways, if you think about it. And, it's been around for a while, and we know that it can lead to weight loss, at least in the short term. We know that it can cause substantial reductions in blood sugar and insulin levels, at least in the short term. And we know that there are studies showing that for people with seizures or epilepsy, it can work wonders. So if I had epilepsy or someone in my family did, I would definitely consider it. But what we also know is that a diet that is very high in fat and very low in carbohydrates long-term can lead to quite a number of problems. I don't think that it is a sustainable way for the planet to feed humanity to go keto. And I also don't think that it's sustainable for human beings to go that way in the long run. Eating a lot of high-fat meats has been linked to heart disease and certain forms of cancer. Going whole grains and legumes are both associated with long-term positive health outcomes. Ketogenic diets are widely thought to be not advisable for pregnant women and nursing mothers, and they're contraindicated for kids. And they can be damaging to the kidneys with that kind of high fat content. So they're associated with digestive problems and constipation and fatigue, and it's very hard to get enough fiber on that diet. Yeah. And only 5% of the U.S. population gets enough fiber. So I'm a fan of anything that works. I mean, my ideology, my predisposition is I also want foods that are healthy for the planet and ethical for animals. And so I tend to not support factory farms and industrialized meat production because I think they're bad for the planet and for our own hearts as people who care. But if somebody can get real benefit from eating animal products, I'm not going to rob them of that. I'm not going to say they shouldn't do that. I think I can respect that. But in the larger picture, I think, I support moving towards a world where everyone can have enough to eat, where our climate is stable, where we have enough water, where our topsoil is preserved. And broadly speaking, I think that's a more organic and a more plant-based direction.
Beautiful.
From a health perspective, I do not think we have any studies, long-term studies showing benefit from a keto diet. We have short-term studies, but not long-term. And I don't think we ever will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful message. I'm 100% on board with what you're preaching. And I know that you have a Food Revolution Summit coming right up here very soon. I would love if you could just finish us up by talking a bit about that. And I highly recommend everyone listening join. We'll have a link to that on the show notes page here. So make sure to check that out. But Ocean, tell us a bit about what this summit is all about. I mean, hopefully as people have listened to this, they now understand what the Food Revolution is all about, but what's going on with this summit?
Yeah, you could probably tell I'm a bit passionate about this stuff. And, I'm not alone. I know you join me in this.
Yes.
So do a lot of other people. And for the Food Revolution Summit, more than 300,000 people are converging from all over the planet for an online summit. And my dad and colleague, John Robbins, and I are interviewing 24 of the top food experts on the planet. And we're bringing forth their voices and their brilliant wisdom. And we're asking them what's really going on with our food system and what can we do about it? And how can we bring real healing to our bodies and to our world? And we're digging in real depth with, experts like Dale Bredesen, who led the first study in history documented in medical journals to show reversal of Alzheimer's disease. And we're working with Drs. Dean and Ayesha Sherzai from Loma Linda, California, who are telling us that we can eliminate 90% of Alzheimer's cases just with diet and lifestyle factors. And they're telling us how, and they've been researching this for 30 years. And, we're talking with Dr. Dean Ornish and Dr. Neil Barnard and Joel Furman and Michael Greger and Vandana Shiva on the global impact of our food choices, and the Food Babe and Vani Hari, and the more spiritual side with Anthony William, and we'll have Chris Carr, and quite an array. David Perlmutter and Daniel Amen are joining us, talking about the gut and the brain and how this all connects. And I'm just thrilled that we get to do this and bring these voices forward and share their wisdom. And I love hearing my dad interview these folks, because he knows just the questions to ask to evoke the heart of their expertise. Mm-hmm. And so we bring this out to the world for free. And you can sign up and join in and catch it all. And I hope you will.
Beautiful. Well, Ocean, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. And I'm really just a huge fan of your work and the message that you're putting out to the world. And it's been an honor to have you on and have you have this conversation and have you share your wisdom with my audience. I really appreciate it.
My privilege. Thank you so much for your beautiful work.
Yeah.
And we're doing it together. We really are.
Awesome.